Hello, I'm Dr. Matthew Sharps, here for the World of the Mind. Today I wanted to talk a little bit and introduce you to my new book with my wife, clinical psychologist Dr. Janet Price Sharps. The book is called Dissociation and Belief. The subtitle, The Psychology of Why Things Go Horribly Wrong and What to Do About It. It's a fairly grandiose title, but on the other hand, it's a fairly grandiose topic. Now, what exactly is dissociation? Well, it's actually not that easy to define specifically, but it's fairly easy just to characterize. It's the ability to take our minds out of physical reality. When things start to feel a little unreal to us, things start to feel like, well, other things could be happening than what is normal here. If you've ever missed your turnoff while you're daydreaming while you're driving along, you're in a mild state of dissociation. Okay? And so what? Well, the fact is, there's been very little study of dissociation comparatively, but the difficulty with that is this. Dissociation affects everybody, and it affects all of us in pretty much every aspect of life, ranging from the most everyday and prosaic through situations that influence nation states and even a variety of factors worldwide. Now, why hasn't something that important been studied that much? Well, in a way it has, but only in its most severe form, really, the dissociative identity disorders that we used to call multiple personality. Now, these are horrendous conditions in which there's so much dissociation between the individual and the world and the individual's own mental processes that we start to see separate and segregable personalities arising inside one person. That's an extraordinary thing, and not surprisingly, it's what has attracted an extraordinary amount of research attention. I've met medical people who only think of dissociation in those terms. But the fact is, dissociation has a normal side too, and that's become more and more evident in more and more recent research. Everybody is capable of dissociating, of removing their mental reality from the physical reality around them. Now, why would such a thing have evolved in the human species? Well, it's actually not a bad idea. Every so often, we need to get away from physical reality, don't we? Things are tragic, things are awful, terrible things are happening. Well, if we don't need to be focusing on them for the moment, our ability to dissociate can give us a bit of a surcease from the harshness of reality. We can daydream, we can fantasize, okay? And there's another factor that's really important, too. You're not going to invent anything unless you can dissociate to a degree. Now, look, if you're just running through the world, okay, we're having sex with this and eating this food and drinking this water. Well, that's what most living creatures do, and they get along with it, and good for them. But in the human, how do we invent something? Look, consider relatively lightweight metal alloys, some sticks made out of wood, and some women's underwear. Now, you put that all together, and you're not going to make much out of it. You probably might notice it. Well, you can't really eat it or drink it, so you leave it alone. But the Wright brothers didn't, okay? You look at that the new metal alloys, and they were able to make engines that could be lifted into the air by some kind of airplane. It turns out that light wooden sticks turn out to be exactly what you need to spread the wings. As far as the women's underwear goes, oddly enough, the kind of cloth that they made the Wright Flyer out of, you go to the Smithsonian and look up at that thing hanging from the ceiling, it's a kind of cloth that normally was used for underwear. All right, just turned out to be perfect. Well, the point is, though, that you really can't get there from just that simple reality. You have to dissociate and think about the possibilities. The important thing is that dissociation and belief. Do I believe I could turn these objects into an airplane or into a telephone or into the internet? Invention, creativity relies on dissociation. So, good thing. But why do we say the psychology of why things go horribly wrong and what to do about it? Because dissociation has the dark side, too. We can create entities in our minds that have no existence in the real world. People will do this in the romantic realm. They see a person, they say, my goodness, this is a wonderful person, because they're very attractive. And they create somebody living inside that body that doesn't exist at all. And if you've been in the world of psychology for more than a few days, you've run into this where the person is being divorced and they're not so much angry as astonished. How could that wonderful person, have turned out to be like this? That's not just at the everyday prosaic level either. As we'll see in some videos coming up in this series, this dissociation, these effects have changed beliefs in realms that have caused entire cultures to starve, that have caused people to make mistakes in warfare, that have cost thousands of lives. These are the dissociated processes. And of course, in these videos, we'll also be talking about what to do about it. But for the moment, okay, well, fair enough. You can see how, okay, I thought this person was somebody else, so I married them and now they have my house. Okay, great. But what can we see in a larger sense? Well, one of the things I've done a lot of work on with personally, and my wife, Dr. Price Sharp, says as well, is the forensic realm, the realm of criminal justice. And it's a wonderful way of measuring normal dissociation, dissociative symptoms that all of us could have, okay, far below the level we see in multiple personality disorder, modern DID, dissociative identity disorder. Well, it turns out that in eyewitness memory, there's a certain dissociation from physical reality. We know that people's memories change, as we've discussed in other videos in this series. They change in three directions. It's been on since 1932, the work of a psychologist named Bartlett. Our memories get shorter. We remember the core of those memories. And our personal beliefs can change them. We've even shown that as we go over a memory in our head many times while we make mistakes, those mistakes become part of the next memory. By the time we get to court, having told the story a number of times to detectives, to ourselves, well, the account may not resemble physical reality very much. That memory can have become removed, not because of the physical reality in which things happened, but because of the internal reality as we dissociate from the physical in our minds. We also see this in officer-involved shootings, okay, or at least the judgment of them. We find that people will often, looking at the horrendous consequences of an officer-involved shooting, may start creating reasons in their mind why the police officer did this or that or the other thing that not only have no bearing on the actual case, they have no origin there. They came out of the person's preconceived ideas. As we've talked about in previous videos here, the person's preconceived ideas that have no existence in physical reality. But I think one of the most certainly egregious of these factors in dissociation lies in something we see quite often, blaming the victim. Fairly recently, in California, a young woman was slaughtered by a pack of dogs. They were domestic dogs, but they basically had formed a pack. They ate part of her. Now, when you looked up on the internet what people were saying, no, this kind of dog is just fine. There's no reason. The dogs are wonderful. They're wonderful dogs, wonderful dogs. Very few people were focused on the poor young woman and her agony. Another case in the American West, mountain lion killed another lady, and the internet response was, how dare she be in that mountain lion space? They were there first. I didn't see anything about, my God, this poor woman was mauled to death by this mountain lion. And we even see this in the case of blaming the victim, where somebody's been subjected to a horrendous murder, sometimes for gain, sometimes who knows why, sometimes people kill each other. And yet the response is, well, she was probably in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe she startled the person who killed her. Okay. How is this possible? How can we blame the victim? Because it happens quite a lot. Okay. Well, it turns out to be dissociation. We experimented on this. We studied this using that wonderful instrument, really. It's called the Dissociative Experiences Scale. It's the second edition of the thing. It allows us to study dissociation very directly. Dissociative ideas, dissociative thinking. What we find is rather interesting. We did an experiment, which we used a standardized crime. Okay, we run all this through past our law enforcement colleagues, so they'll tell us, are we doing anything stupid? It turns out this is a pretty good crime. But we presented the text of this crime to people as if they were jurors under three conditions: where there was no violence, it was a theft, but where there was no violence, where there was some violence, assault and battery, and where there was a murder. And we assessed the dissociative levels of the normal people, ordinary people who'd be on a jury, who responded to this. We found something interesting. The level of violence from whether there were assault and battery or whether a person is murdered had no effect on people's judgments of the perpetrator's guilt or innocence. That's kind of interesting, but fair enough. But violence did influence the guilt of the victim. Okay? People seeing the victim as more guilty, okay? People seeing the victim as more guilty were the less violent conditions. If the person was assaulted and battered, they weren't seen as guilty of their own the crime against themselves. They were seen as more innocent, I should say. than if they were murdered, unless the people were dissociated. High levels of dissociation, even in normal people, found that there was victim guilt even in the cases of their own murder. Now think about that. Dissociation, and this is not dissociation in someone who you might find, for example, incarcerated in a psychiatric facility. This is dissociation in pretty much anybody. Higher levels of dissociation in the people you see around you will result in perceiving that the victim is more guilty of their own murder. Now that starts to make a little more sense, though, when we find something else, too. The more dissociated saw the perpetrators as less guilty. Now, that said, I'm not sure we can apply that necessarily to packs of dogs or to mountain lions eating people, but it certainly seems to work in the human realm. And when we see people blaming the guilty, my goodness, even for their own murders, it's the effects of dissociation. So we begin to see how dissociation and its effects on our beliefs can be very, very important for our own lives, for the lives of human beings living around other human beings, some of whom commit crimes. And we're going to be discussing this more in several different aspects in this series of videos. Hope you'll find it interesting, and I hope you'll subscribe if you feel like it. I'm Dr. Matthew Sharps, here for the World of the Mind and our new book, Dissociation and Belief.